Welcome to this beautiful Smoky Mountain scene, or it can be whatever mountains that you live in, but around here I'm about 30 miles from the Smoky Mountains, so I enjoy painting them whenever I can. Our supplies are your 9x12 canvas that's in the kit. I've got a 1/2-inch brush and a small liner. It's about a number 2 liner, I think. We'll start out today. I did do my drawing, and I'll have that pre-done for you so you don't have to worry about it. My colors are white, Payne's gray, which I prefer much to black. Black is a very flat, unflattering tone. Sorry, my green is running. Ultramarine blue, Hauser green, which is just a really dark green, and burnt sienna and cadmium yellow. So I'm going to dip into some white first and just get my little sunset or sunrise, whichever, covered. My paints are pretty good. I don't want to give you real cheap paints that don't cover even a pencil mark, and so you may have to go over it twice with a white, but a lot of the cheaper brands, it's just like very transparent, and it's really difficult to try to get anything painted because everything is so transparent, especially with the lighter colors. So I try to give you some decent paints so that it covers well. Now I am going to take this white out over the edges here so that I can bring some yellow into it. You could leave this rough, like see those lines? Those are kind of cool. Or you could smooth it out if you want it to be, smoother. Sorry about my pinky. I have a fractured pinky, so I had to take my big brace off and put something a little prettier on for you. But hopefully it's not too noticeable. I'm not going to mess with that a lot more because I want to put another layer on there. Now this color is sort of reflecting down in here, but I could paint that on later. I could paint the reflections on later, but in the meantime, I'm going to clean my brush because otherwise, if I was using yellow ochre, you can go into your blue without worrying about it turning green. But because I'm using cad yellow, which is a little brighter, yellow ochre is okay, but it's a little bit of a sleepy yellow, if that's a term. It is in my book. But so I prefer to not have a lot of that yellow when I'm transferring into blues. You could even use a little Payne's gray as part of your transfer. You do want to make sure you cover all your canvas because you don't want little white empty spots of canvas showing through on this kind of painting that's scenery, And some other things like flowers, you can get away with that. But on scenery, you don't want to. I could probably even put a little bit of this burnt sienna as a transfer color. That would be kind of nice, actually. It is orangey and it blends beautifully with blue. I think that'll work great right there. I can even add a few lines of that in the middle. So now, go ahead and cover the rest of our sky. I just touched the blue barely. This blue is really bright, ultramarine, and so you just barely have to touch the end of it to get some. And it will cover quite well. The reason I do this X-type movement is it fills in the canvas really well. If you were doing this on like acrylic paper, you don't have to worry as much about that. But with a canvas, because it's got a lot of texture, I like to fill it in so that it doesn't show quite as much texture when it's all said and done. Now I'm just using that same movement to blend it. And I'm going to wipe the excess off my brush. Come across it like that. There we go. Awesome. I like that. Clean your brush out real well. Come back into your white. Kind of smooth that transition a little bit right there. We'll come back with some more white later. Or you could put another layer on right now. Okay. If you want to, you could put some little line clouds with your burnt sienna. This is optional, but it just adds a little interest sometimes. Like maybe there's some clouds in the foreground. You can also make the sky a little bit darker, and I'm going to show you if you wanted to mix a little bit of Payne's Gray with your blue. You can leave it the way it is, but I'm just trying to show you different options. If you mix a little Payne's Gray with your blue, it tones it down a bit so that it's not quite as bright, more of an evening look. See what a difference that makes with just toning it down a little bit with Payne's Gray. I just wiped my brush. Transfer that color down a little bit. There, that's really nice. If you want it to be a little smoother rather than the dry brush effect, you just wet your brush a little bit. Come back over it again. Now look at the difference between those two skies. That's very different. So I'm just trying to show you options that you can have. There. Okay, still with my big brush. We're going to go into a little burnt sienna with a little cad yellow. We're going to do our little back layer of mountains here. They're getting a lot of light. And so that's why they're Payne's and cad. Sorry, that's my phone going off. Now all my friends can tell you my phone's always going off with reminders of what I need to be doing at that moment. I'm just tapping with my brush and maybe blending just a little bit towards the top where the sun is touching it. You can make it a little bit lighter even. It's sort of being blinded by the light, so to speak. A little more burnt sienna with cad yellow down here. And I'm going to add a little white to it also, just to help blend it a little bit. Okay, now we're going to add a little more of another color. We're going to come back and put highlights on this later, but for right now, this is my Payne's Gray mixed with a little ultramarine blue. And we're just going to, ooh, that's a little dark. Add a little white to that. So it is being hit by the light, and it is the Smoky Mountains. They do have a very bluish tint to them. We can add highlights in a little bit. Right now I'm just trying to get the main shapes in. You can add a little more bluish tone to this if you want. Keep it gray. It's up to you. A little more of a later in the evening tends a little more towards the gray. And here I'm going to put a little bit of mist. Just putting a little white in there as a mist. You can use your finger to smooth that edge of that mist and make it nice and misty looking, fog looking. You can put another layer on the mist later, but right now I just want to get one layer down. And over here, I'm going to do the same thing with this bunch of mountains. They're coming down. You can add some highlights on them later as well. Just trying to get the basics here. A little row there. Acrylics is all about the layers, just like watercolor. I mean, you can do some quick stuff, but the depth comes from the layers. You can trick the eye into thinking there's a whole lot more going on than really is just by using layers. So I encourage layers, and I encourage people that are painting along with me that don't give up on, don't get discouraged if it's not looking just right, because it's the layers that's going to bring it forth. I'm not being very particular about how I'm doing this here. I'm just hinting at some layers. I'm going to hint at some layers here in our mountains. Okay, now as the mountains get closer, you begin to be able to see more tree shapes, and so I'm going to be putting those tree shapes in here. Not too worried about them back in this back section, but I did want to add a little more color. And again, towards the bottom, you got a little bit of mist, Smoky Mountain mist. Okay, our next layer, I'm still going to use this brush. I could switch to a smaller one, but I'm going to stay with this. Again, I've got blue and Payne's Gray. And this layer is going to look a little more like trees. And all I'm doing is zigzagging my brush up and down like that. And when I do that, it creates this appearance of very distant trees in the background. See? Isn't that neat? And then you can sort of fog it down by just blending down a little bit. But you've got that edge that makes it look like you've got a forest of trees. And what I do is I like to put a little white in and do another layer a little further forward. The heat's blowing in here too, and so it's drying out my paint pretty quickly. You can mist. If you think it's drying a little too quick, you can just throw a quick mist on there with a spritz bottle. And that does seem to do the trick pretty well for me. So I always keep a spritz bottle around. Okay. We'll bring it on down here. A little bit of mist. I can redo those right there. I just want some more mist right there. We can put some more mist layers on top too. This isn't, this is just our first pass, so. I think I'm going to have to give you 2 whites for this one because it looks like it's going to need more white. This is where having an extra brush around is helpful. Just sort of, this is a clean brush. And you can just sort of look at the difference there. When you smooth that out a little bit, So if you have an extra brush laying around that you can use to smooth something, by all means, you'll want to do that. Just makes a difference. Just remember, acrylics, you better keep your brushes in the water or rinse because they do dry very hard. It's essentially a wet plastic, and so when it dries, it's plastic. So remember to keep your brushes wet. That way you can use them again and again. These brushes aren't fancy. I have about, probably 150 brushes. And I use some really fancy ones when I'm doing pet portraits to be able to get certain effects. But these are inexpensive brushes, but they really do quite a bit of work. Okay, I'm going to switch a little more blue. Looks like we have a little bit area in there that doesn't have anything. I am going to grab this big brush and fill that in with fog. And my fog probably needs a touch of yellow in it just because of all that sunlight. Okay, now I can come over to this next one and put my trees in there. There's obviously trees in the other layer, but they're just harder to define because they're so far away. And so as you move forward, there's a little more definition to everything. Again, this is Payne's Gray with blue and a little bit of white to tone it down so it's not too dark. Although that one is pretty dark right there. Okay. I'm going to grab some white and just sort of blend this down a little bit. This is going to be a lot prettier when we put the reflections from the sun on it. But right now, we're getting our main layers down. It's going to be a little extra mist right there. So I'm just creating the base for that extra mist that we're going to have. Sometimes after you're brushing a little bit, you have to come back and sort of rework what's under it. I'm very, very lightly touching this, by the way. If I was doing it real hard, there would be really obvious brush strokes. But because I'm doing it very, very light, you're not seeing harsh brush strokes, which is on purpose. See, that was accidental, that little bit of white on the back of that. You'll get all the kind of little cool accidents happening when you're painting with acrylics, which I love. Same with watercolors. Sometimes if you brush up, it creates that fog effect a little better. And sometimes if you let it dry for about 5 minutes and then come back to it, you can get that effect a little better as well. Just like I let this white dry for a little bit right back here. And now I can come and sort of smooth those edges a little bit. There we go. It's better. A little bit of white there because I drew my line too hard for my son. Okay, the rest is done with highlights, so I'm going to move down in here that I want this misty background behind the trees. I'm going to have some bigger trees down here, but I want it to have a misty background. And maybe a little bit of this green mixed in here and there. As the mountains get closer, you can usually see a little more green in them than you do when they're at a distance. And so what I do is I like to throw in a little bit of this dark green. Even though it's not a lot of it, it's just a little bit, but put some mist right there. I'm going to come in with my finger and smooth that a little bit while it's wet. Sometimes you can even dampen your finger just a touch. Sometimes it's still too dry. This is better done when the background is still wet. If your background is still wet, you can blend that with your fingers pretty easily. But because my background was already dry, it doesn't work quite as easily. That's a little wetter, see, so I can blend that out a little better. There we go. If you don't end up touching it with your with your fingers, that's okay. You can just do whatever feels right. You can continue to use your brush. Just remember, very soft touches, very soft touch will still create. See, I'm not using my finger on this one, but I'm using a very, very, very soft touch. So you got two methods of getting that mist, okay? I'm literally just barely kissing this canvas. Circular motions help too. There you go. Okay. Put this down here. Add a little bit of green. I'm going to have some darker layers on here too, but just for any mist that's showing through, I want to have some of these other colors. On this side, it's going to be considerably darker. I didn't clean my brush, and so there's a little bit of white on it, and I did that on purpose because I don't want it to look black, right? We're not going for a little too much contrast. I don't necessarily want, but now that white is still wet, and so see how that's giving us almost a little bit of mist, which is nice. Throwing a little bit of this green in there. I didn't give you a whole lot of green because you just don't need it for this area. But let's pretend that this is a layer of mountains or of trees back here. Okay. If you come across every now and then, it creates a little more of that closer up branches effect. And we're going to use the smaller brush here in a minute, which will actually help. But okay, got my dark parts on. It takes a bit of work to get that Payne's gray out of the brush, I'm telling you. Okay, a little bit of white. A little bit of that yellow. I want to put a little bit of that color in our mist right here. I'm just barely touching the canvas, just enough to hint that there is some reflections going on here, and some where the light is hitting the mountains and the trees. It's getting some extra light, and sometimes it needs a little bit of that orange mixed in, or the burnt sienna, which is kind of an orange, mixed into it. I still want to see some of the blue through it so that it's not completely orange, but I do want to have some of that orange light reflecting onto our mountains here. Maybe a little bit down here. Okay, that works. Let's make this a little mistier right here. Circular motions. Maybe even the mist can sort of come into this whole area a little bit. That's pretty cool. If you like what's happening, go with it. If you want to fix it, you know, but don't get upset. Just move with it. A little bit of ultramarine with a little bit of Payne's gray makes a really nice color. There can be some mountains here that are getting hit a little bit by the sun. Okay, now we're going to our smaller brush here, okay? My ultramarine, a little more of my ultramarine. I want some more defined brushes, or trees right here. I'm just going back and forth with my paintbrush. I put a line, and then I'm going back and forth. And then I'm going to just smooth out the bottom so he sort of fades into the fog, okay? It's almost like a smiley face movement. So it's not real complicated, but it takes a little bit for your hand to figure out how to do this. But you make a line, and then you go smiley face, and smooth out the bottom, okay? And it looks like a distant tree being defined inside the fog. You could put one right in here that maybe just the top is visible and the rest of it's disappearing into the fog. See? Pretty cool, huh? I think I need another layer right in here. Some taller, some shorter. Now, on that bottom up just a little bit. Okay, now we can put some bigger lines in these forward because they're a little bit further forward. When you're doing the forward section, dip your brush into the water and then into the paint, and you will get, it will release more paint. It'll be a little waterier, but not too watery that it's not going to stick or anything, but just watery enough that it will create those little branches that you want. See how my eye is trying to make them all evenly distant? The eye will try to do that to you, and I encourage you to stop it. just say no. Because the eye does tend to try to make everything even. brain wants to make it all even. And we don't want it even. We want it looking very natural. Okay. A little more of a bluish tint on some of these. I'm trying to do it such a light touch. Sometimes it takes me 3 strokes just to get it to touch the canvas. That's how light my touch is when I'm doing these. I don't want it real thick. Now, if you are more of a impasto type painter, it's a thicker paint, then you do whatever it feels like you're wanting to create. Please adjust this. I always tell my students, you don't want it to look like mine. It's your painting. Mine is simply an inspiration, and my examples that I give you as I paint is just techniques. Techniques that I learned in art school, techniques that you can use to create whatever it is that you're seeing. So you want it to look the way that you're seeing it. And I am grabbing my ultramarine, a little more of my ultramarine. I want some more defined brushes or trees right here. I'm just going back and forth with my paintbrush. I put a line and then I'm going back and forth. And then I'm going to just smooth out the bottom so he sort of fades into the fog, okay? It's almost like a smiley face movement. So it's not real complicated, but it takes a little bit for your hand to figure out how to do this. But you make a line, and then you go smiley face, and smooth out the bottom, okay? And it looks like a distant tree being defined inside the fog. You could put one right in here that maybe just the top is visible and the rest of it's disappearing into the fog. See? Pretty cool, huh? Now, ultramarine. I'm going to put a bigger tree here, and this is what we're going for on this foreground. I probably need another layer over here first. I think I need another layer right in here. Some taller, some shorter. Now, on that bottom up just a little bit. Okay. Now we can put some bigger lines in these forward because they're a little bit further forward. When you're doing the forward section, dip your brush into the water and then into the paint, and you will get, it will release more paint. It'll be a little waterier, but not too watery that it's not going to stick or anything, but just watery enough that it will create those little branches that you want. See how my eye is trying to make them all evenly distant? The eye will try to do that to you, and I encourage you to stop it. just say no. Because the eye does tend to try to make everything even. The brain wants to make it all even, and we don't want it even. We want it looking very natural. I gotta go get some more blue. One of my other sisters is an artist also, and I remember when I visited her many, many moons ago, back in the 70s, we sat down and we painted a painting out of a book. I think it was a Bob Ross book. But we looked at the same painting. We had the same palettes, okay, same colors. And our paintings were completely different. Completely different. The mountains were closer in one, further in another. There was more mist in one. The colors were completely different. We had the same palette, but because of the way you mix colors, you can create, brighter, darker. And so it was so interesting to see that we were both looking at the same exact picture, and yet we came up with completely different results. And that's exactly the way it's supposed to be. This is a little too gray up here, so I'm just adding some blues. Some of this ultramarine blue. Give it a little more color. Make it more interesting. Sometimes a little splash of color can do wonders for a painting that is kind of blah. Okay. I'm actually going to put a little of that blue up here too. It needs to be a lot softer because it's in the distance, but we're going to put some highlights on these things too. But right now we're just adding some color. Gives a little bit of shadows there too, which is nice. Sorry, it's a finger painting now. I just like to use my fingers a lot for smoothing things. Try not to get in on my little mini cast. Okay. Now, before we move on to our very front trees, I'm going to put some color on here, okay? Because the light is shining on different things, and we want to have some of that brightness reflected down here on these. Maybe these are little rocks or something. Maybe it's just the light hitting some of the trees up in the foreground. I'm barely touching this, just so that it's just barely putting a tiny bit of color on there. Especially right here in the middle, where that sunlight is coming through, sunbeams. We want to add that warmth to that layer of trees right there. See how that makes a difference? We can add a little more on the trees when we get them, but I want to have some in the background. Okay, now we're going to take our brush, blue. You can put a little more green on this if you want. It's kind of up to you whether you want it to lean towards the green or the blue. I'll prop this up a little higher so I can get towards the bottom of it. I want to have a bunch of forward trees, and a couple of them should probably be bigger. I'm not worried about getting it too terribly straight. I did wet my brush first. I'm just sort of tapping, really. what we get up here in the Smokies is a lot of these southern pines. They do have a distinct shape, but whatever shape it is that you like, you can make this whatever kind of tree you prefer. The thing about the southern pines that I like is you don't have to put all that much detail in it because it's not a completely full tree. It usually you can see the stem for a while, and then there'll be a little bunch, and then you can see the stem a little more, and then there'll be another little bunch. And you just have to remember, don't make them perfectly even. Sometimes they're shorter. Okay, and if you don't want to do this with your brush, I'm going to show you something else. Another little trick that you can do. Bob Ross trick, actually. He taught this to begin with. And I've thrown this brush in here in case you want to do it. This is called a fan brush. It's probably a little big for this project, but you can take a fan brush, dip it in your water, get some color, and you can go like this with your fan brush. Now, I like the detail that I get with my little brush, but if you take this brush and you go back and forth, try to use the upward motion so you can practice, get a paper plate out, practice on it. How to go back and forth with your fan brush and create the tree shape. It does take a lot more paint that way, which is okay. I'm just used to doing it with the little brush. So there's a tree. Now our next one doesn't have to have quite as much detail. Maybe he's just got a few branches on him. I'm using just the end of it because really this brush is a little too big for this small canvas. Remember to zigzag down. You don't want everything straight across. It'll look weird. Kind of zigzag down so that some branches are up and some are straight across and some a little bit down. And then you can take your brush and sort of blend it down a little bit so that they're sort of melting into the lower background. Let's do another one right here. Not the same distance apart. I like the smaller brush definitely for the tips because otherwise this fan brush can wind up being too big. It makes it's hard to get this little top of the tree that you need. It has to be smaller. Then you can switch to the fan brush if you want to. And go ziggy-zaggy back and forth. Just remember, get wider as you go down. I am tapping, by the way. I'm not painting, I'm tapping because that makes the branch texture with all the little sticks and stuff coming out. See? And then I take my other brush and blend it in down here a little bit. I'll put another one right next to him. This one's a little crooked because they're not all perfectly straight. Sometimes I'll purposely make one that's a little bit crooked just so that it looks a little more natural. Okay. See, this seems complicated when you look at it, but then when you start breaking it down into little steps, it's not so bad. one little tree at a time. Don't get worried and don't get overwhelmed. Just one little tree at a time. If you're worried about the shape of the tree, practice on a piece of paper on the side, any scrap paper from your printer. Practice the shape. Your hand has to learn what you want it to do. If you're not used to doing it all the time, your hand just needs to go, oh, yeah. It's kind of like catching a ball. Once you catch the ball 2 or 3 times, you're like, oh, yeah, your hand and your brain coordinate, and they're like, now I know what you want. It's the same thing with painting. You just kind of have to do it a few times and let your hand and your eyes and your brain coordinate. And once they get the hang of it, then it's not so bad. And sometimes things can come out fairly easily without all that much effort. And sometimes it takes a little more effort depending on what it is that you're doing. Get the top of them done. This guy's a little bigger, so he's going to go down a little bit further. Sometimes the trees have little sticks, you can see the branches too, and so I like to usually just toss a few little thin swipes here and there so that it looks like there's branches intertwined. It's just the impression. The eye will make up the difference. The whole thing about art is you don't want to give it all away, right? That's a photo. Just give them an idea of what it is that you're trying to get across. Let their eye finish it. Sometimes they all see something different, which is really odd. I always thought that was, it's interesting and all, but I painted an Easter painting with the lion and the lamb, and it's interesting, but people look at it and it seems to mean different things to all of them. So that's okay. That's just like I said that your painting is supposed to look different. It's supposed to look like you. It's the same when people look at art. One person sees one thing, one person sees another. That's the beauty of art. I'm just adding some little tiny guys in here. Not a lot of detail, just giving the hint that there's some background trees in there too. And because my brush isn't quite as loaded with paint, they do look like they're further back, which is exactly what I want. Try not to get too carried away with this because I don't want you to get discouraged because it's too hard. But when I start painting, sometimes it's hard to stop. Okay, let's use the finer brush to put our line here for our last tree. Let's make this one go up a little higher, right there. He can be a little bit bigger. Maybe even go up into the sky just a little bit. I think that's big enough to go to this brush. If there's something you really like, don't cover over it when you do your trees. So be sure and keep an eye out for that, because if sometimes you're painting and you're like, oh wow, that came out really nice. And then as you're doing your next layer, you want to preserve that, because you'll be really bummed out when you go, man, I really like that, and then I covered it with the next layer. So just work your other elements around that area that's really nice. I call them eye candy. So the little eye candy areas that you think turned out super cool, you don't want to cover them. Make sure they're there so that you can peek at it, like this little area right here where the light hits those trees. I like that. So I don't want to cover that. But I do need to have a bigger branch right there, right above it. And down here, I'll just fill in like there's some other stuff down there, but it's not super detailed. And this brush again is good for that. See how that did that? I had a lighter background and I just sort of tapped. I just tapped around. And that looks like bush and brush. Clean that brush. I think I'm done with that. Okay, a little bit of yellow highlights on some of these where the sun is hitting them also. Just every now and then. It doesn't have to be all over it. Just a little hint that it's capturing the light as well. I'm just touching. I don't want it to be too much, so I'm just lightly touching. Remember that your acrylic colors will dry roughly 30% darker. So when you're putting these highlights on here, just remember it's going to dry darker. Don't freak out if it looks a little too bright, because it is going to change. Just lightening up a little bit right there. I felt like there was a line in that and I didn't like that. And you can make this a little mistier right up here if you want. Okay. Speaking of mist, I think there should be a more mist right in there. Yeah, that's better. And this mist could have a little bit of yellow tone to it as well, so you can just touch it up with a little bit of yellow mixed with white, so that just little bits of that mist are capturing that light as it comes through in little areas, but not all areas, but just some areas are capturing that light from the sunset. That was too much, definitely, for that distant tree. I have to wipe it off just a little bit. Every now and then throw a little of that color in here. If you want to make it more interesting, you can throw a little of that color down there as well. Grab your brush. Down here it's not as bright, so let's use the burnt sienna. But see how that implies that there's some light hitting a few grasses in the foreground. It adds a little bit of interest to it. Well, there you go. That's pretty well close to done, but we got to put a few birds in here, okay? Now, I know most people do just a V for the birds, but they're actually not really shaped like V's, but that is where you start. So let's do a V to start with, right? But let's let one end hang down a little bit. So we do our V, but one end hangs down. And then add a little bit to the top, and there you go. Now, if they're coming right at you, then you do get that just a V. I usually try to do things in threes with birds. It looks more like another little creature than a bird. Maybe just go with the V's if you're not comfortable with it. Just go with a straight V. Okay, your background is already dry, so you can wipe it off if you mess up. It's mostly a V, but then you can let the end come down a little bit. I think you got a little long, so I'm gonna wipe off a little of that excess. Well, I hope that was fun, and I hope that you come back and next month and enjoy another art kit. I'm trying to put up one every month, and but if you like them individually, you can always just get an individual one. Just smoothing the top, adding a little mist and smoothing the top. There we go. So you can cut, this is acrylics. You can come back and piddle and play with it to your heart's content. And sometimes you just have to decide, oh man, I just need to leave it alone. But if you like to come back and piddle, you can do that. And you know, if you don't like what you did, let's say if I put this right here and I don't like it, because the back is dry, you could wipe it off. See, it wipes right off. But you can also say, this needs a little more blue. I'm going to add a little bit of blue tone to this because it just wasn't blue enough. And like this right here, just adding a little bit of soft blue touch to it. Wipe up off of the mist. Add a little bit of blue to the background. If you think that that was too orangey right here, you can add a little blue to it. To the edges, maybe where it's not getting as much of that sun. This is a very, very thin layer of paint. But like I said, you can piddle around with it and play with it until you like the way it looks. And if you make a mistake, wipe it off real quick. I like towards the edges for it to show a little more of the blue because it's not being hit with quite as much light. That's why I did that. There we go. I think that's more realistic. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad that you came to paint today. We're painting together. And check out the website, order another kit, enjoy. I'd love to have you join me for more. See you next time.